The kerosene lamp had burned down to almost nothing, and I remember watching the last of the flame because I could not look at my father's face. He was sitting at the kitchen table where we had eaten 10,000 meals together, and he would not meet my eyes either. Outside, the December wind moved against the windows, and on the table between us, folded once, was a piece of paper with numbers on it, my father's debt. And beside those numbers, though no one had written it there, was me. I was 17 that winter. And by the following Tuesday, I would be given to a man I had spoken to exactly twice to settle what my father owed. Before I go any further, let me tell you who I am. My name is Anna. I am 80 years old now, and I grew up Old Order Amish in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, in a time most people alive today cannot even imagine. I left that world late in my life, later than most, and this channel, Hannah the Amish Girl, is where the old women like me finally say the things we carried in silence for 60 years. If you want to hear the truth about how Amish life used to be, not the tourist postcard, but the way it was, please subscribe and press the like button. And in the comments, tell me where you are listening from. I am an old woman, and it comforts me to know. Now let me explain something, because I know how the word sold sounds to modern ears. No money changed hands for me directly. There was no auction, no block to stand on. It was quieter than that, and in some ways worse. It was a marriage arranged to erase a debt, and everyone at the wedding knew it, and no one said it out loud. That was how these things were done in my day. My father was a good man who made a bad season. 2 bad seasons, if I am honest. The blight took the corn one year, and the milk price fell the next, and he borrowed from a man in our church district named Amos Baylor. Amos was not a cruel man in the way you might picture. He was a deacon. He wore the same plain clothes as everyone, but he was a widower with a large farm and no wife to run the house, and he was 51 years old, and I was 17, and my father owed him more than 3 years of harvest could repay. I want you to understand how a girl learned her worth in that world. School ended at the 8th grade. After that, your education was the kitchen, the garden, the barn, the loom. By 14, you were a woman in all the ways that mattered to the work. By 16, you went to the Sunday singings, and a boy would offer you a ride home in his buggy, and that was courtship. That was how it was supposed to happen, quietly, slowly, with your own small yes at the center of it. But a girl whose father owed a deacon did not get her small yes. I remember the evening it was settled. My mother had sent me to the cellar for potatoes, and when I came back up the stairs, I heard my father's voice through the door, low and broken, saying, "She is a hard worker. She will not shame you." He was talking about me the way you would talk about a horse you were ashamed to sell. And I stood on those cellar stairs with the potatoes cold in my apron, and I understood, before anyone told me a word, that the arrangement had already been made over my head in my absence while I fetched vegetables for supper. I did not cry then. I want you to know that. I set the potatoes on the counter, and I peeled them, and I made supper, because that is what I had been trained to do, and the training held even when everything else in me was falling. Stay with me now, because what I am about to tell you is the part I have never said aloud in 63 years. The part about the 11 Sundays. The part about the drawer. But I have to lay the foundation first, so you understand how a whole community can watch a thing like this happen and call it holy. There were 3 things that made it possible. I have had 60 years to name them, and a kind woman in an English town helped me find the words at last. So let me give them to you plainly. The first was submission. A daughter obeyed her father, and then she obeyed her husband, and there was no season of her life in between where she belonged to herself, not one day. She went from one man's roof to another man's roof, and the handing over was called honor. The second was debt as a moral weight. In our world, to owe money was close to sin, and to be unable to pay was a shame that fell on the whole family. My father could not bear that shame, and so the shame was lifted from him and set upon me instead. And everyone agreed this was the loving thing, because it saved the family's name. The third was silence as obedience. A girl did not ask questions about her own future. To ask was pride. To weep was weakness. To simply go quietly, with your prayer cap pinned and your face calm. That was the highest thing a young woman could offer. They called it yielding. I have another word for it now, but I did not have it then. The wedding was in December, which was already unusual, because weddings came after the harvest in November, and this one came late, rushed, in the cold. It was held in Amos's house, not my father's, which everyone understood without saying. There were maybe 150 people. The bishop preached for a long time about a wife submitting to her husband as to the Lord, and I sat on the hard bench in my new blue dress that my mother and aunts had sewn, and I looked at the back of Amos Baylor's gray head, and I tried to feel something that was not fear. I could not find it. After the meal, the roast and the mashed potatoes and the pies the women had baked for 2 days, the guests began to leave in their buggies, the lanterns swinging in the dark, and then they were gone, and it was his house, and I was in it. I was 17, and he was 51, and I knew nothing. Nobody had told me anything. My mother had said only one thing to me that morning while she pinned my cap. She said, "Be good and do not make trouble." That was the whole of my preparation for a marriage. That first night I will not describe to you in the way you might expect, because the truth is that Amos was not violent. I have to be fair to the dead. He was old, and he was tired, and he was, I think, as lost in that room as I was, in his own way. But there was no tenderness in it either, because tenderness is something 2 people learn together over time, and we had been given no time and no reason to learn anything about each other. He saw me as a housekeeper who had come with a wife's duties attached. I saw him as the price of my father's mistake, breathing beside me in the dark. That is a cold way to begin a life together, and it stayed cold. I want to stop here and tell you something, because there may be a young person listening who thinks this is only an old woman's story from a dead time. What happened over the next 11 Sundays, I cannot carry it in 20 minutes. There are things this recording cannot hold. The names, the counting, the drawer, the dress I kept for 27 years. 3 years ago, I wrote it all down. The book is called The Sundays. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. Now let me go on. I said the Sundays, and I owe you that word. In our district, church was every second Sunday, and it was the one day I saw my own mother, my own sisters, the faces I had grown up among. And so I began to count my new life, not in weeks or months, but in Sundays. Because a Sunday was the only day I was still, for a few hours, the girl I had been. 11 Sundays. That is how long it was before I understood, all the way down, that no one was coming to take me home. Not my father, who could not look at me across the meeting house. Not my mother, who pressed my hand and said nothing. 11 Sundays of watching the door, and on the 11th, I stopped watching it. There was a woman named Fanny, older than me, who lived on the next farm. She had been given young too, though not for a debt, and she saw in me something she recognized. She never said much. That was not her way, nor mine. But one wash day, hanging sheets on the line between our properties, she said to me quietly, without turning her head, "You keep something of your own, even if it is only a thing in a drawer. You keep one thing they did not give you and cannot take." And she went on pinning her sheets as though she had said nothing at all. I did not understand her for a long time, but I found my one thing. It does not matter now what it was. What mattered was that in a life where my father, my husband, and my church had decided everything about me, that one small thing in the bottom drawer was mine. I had chosen it. No one had handed it to me to settle anyone's account. And on the hard mornings, and there were many hard years of them, I would open that drawer for one moment before I began the day's work. And I would remember that some small part of me had never been for sale. I stayed married to Amos Byler for 27 years, until he died. I bore his children, and I ran his house, and I milked in the dark, and I baked for the frolics and the funerals, and to the eyes of the whole district I was a good and faithful wife. And I was faithful. But faithful is not the same as free, and I want the difference understood, because our world was very good at pretending they were the same word. When Amos died, I was 44. And here is the thing that still astonishes me. For the first time in my life, I belonged to no man, not my father who had passed by then, not a husband, and I did not know what to do with it, because I had never once in 44 years been asked what I wanted. I had to learn the question before I could ever learn the answer. I did not leave the Amish for many more years after that. I want to be honest because I know the leaving is the part people want. It was not a dramatic night. It was slow. It was my own grown daughter who married for love, a thing I had watched from the outside like a woman, watching a warm window from the cold road. It was seeing that it could be different. And when I finally left, well into my old age, the cost was what it always is, the shunning, the letters unanswered. Grandchildren I see only rarely now. But I found, late, in a plain office in an English town, a kind woman who listened, and she gave me the words I had gone 80 years without. She said the word consent, and she explained it, and I sat in that chair and wept like a girl, because at 17 I had been made to say a vow I had never been asked whether I wanted to make. She said the word autonomy. She said, "Anna, a debt is a thing between two grown men. You were not a coin they were allowed to spend. You were not a coin they were allowed to spend." I have thought about that sentence every single day since. I do not tell you this to make you hate the Amish. I will not do that, and it would not be true to my heart. That world gave me real things. It gave me a community that came to every birth and every burial without being asked. It gave me hands that can do any work. It gave me a faith that I have carried, broken and mended and carried again, into my old age. These are not small gifts, and I will not pretend they are. But there is no scripture that makes a daughter a payment. There is no verse that turns a girl of 17 into the settlement of her father's account. There is no God I believe in now, at 80, who looked down on that cold December room and called it good. A man's debt was made holy by placing it on the back of a child who could not refuse. And the whole community bowed its head and said, "Amen." That was not faith. I know the difference now. Faith does not require a girl to be sold to feel like love. So let me speak now to whoever needs it, because I did not do all this remembering for myself. If you were ever handed from one life to another to pay for something that was not yours, I see you. If you were taught that your going quietly was the same as your goodness, I see you. If you spent long years being faithful to a life you never once got to choose, I see you, and I am here at 80 to tell you the thing no one told me. Your yielding was not your worth. Your silence was not your virtue. And a girl is never, in any world, under any roof, a price to be paid. I was old enough at 17 to run a household. I was old enough to bake for 100 and to milk in the dark and to keep a man's home for 27 years. But I was never old enough to be sold, because no one ever is. If this story reached something in you, tell me in the comments what stayed with you. Tell me where you are listening from, and if you are ready, tell me your own story. I read them. At my age, they are a great comfort. The Sundays, what 20 minutes cannot hold. The link is in the description and the pinned comment. And the morning is yours if you decide it is.